Hello, wonderful people. Do you like the historical epics like the Iliad, Gilgamesh, the Mahābhārata, heroes, gods, journeys, wisdom, and battles? Well, today I'm going to show you an exclusive video I'm pulling from my Patreon, where we go over how to take an ordinary story of yours that really happened and expand it with storytelling techniques into an amazing historical epic. But let me start out with a personal thank you to those who have been most loyal to this channel and the Patreon. The awesome ones: 14, Rift Ranger, Kenny Vetter, Moist Mongol, Shadow 11, Ian Openshaw, Tyler Hartley, Kick Asterisk, Ben McFarlane, Alaunch Boy, and all these names that are on the screen right now. Thank you everyone for your support. It's what allows for this content, and I hope you enjoy this exclusive on how to write your very own national epic. Now, for context. I announced an upcoming contest where the players on my Minecraft server compete to write the best national historical epic. I think this is the biggest, most important contest that we're ever going to run. So I thought now would be an appropriate time to make a thorough guide of how to world build epics. I personally have written what I consider to be 3 personal epics. One quote-unquote war that my Boy Scout troop fought at our summer camp called Yagu. One hour-long YouTube video that I made on a Minecraft war called the Trillium War, and one on a ghost story that me and my college friends underwent in our secret society. So I consider a historical epic to be a true story that you expand and exaggerate, but that's also massive in its scale and really represents some of the fundamental values of the story's culture. Normally, epics are written as poems or song lyrics because they're initially passed down as oral storytelling that is later written down. But for now, let's work on the format of prose epic storytelling. Let me make this first point using examples from my Minecraft server. The first thing you have to do is choose what you're going to write your historical epic about. On a personal level, it's probably gonna be the coolest and most inspiring story that you have and that you might think about most often. On a systematic level, since I'm asking Stoneworks players to write about their nations, the story should be one that is already important to the history of your nation, maybe of its founding, or a big war that you fought in, a big religious event, or maybe it's a story about a group that preceded your nation but you still can tie some kind of lineage to. Let's take the story of my alt account from October to December in 2020 in Rathnir. First, my guy, Dagonashabal, spawned into this island and I stole from these guys called the Turtlonians. Then I fled to the nation of Asharia, who gave me protection, and that started a war where the Asharians genocided the Turtlonians. Later, the Asharian mayor I was under accused me of stealing. I don't know if I did, I probably did. And he drove me out of the town. So I fled to the wild northern continent of Plagos. There, I founded a town, and I and a few others founded the first nation of Plagatea, which quickly fell apart because I was claiming things too aggressively, and the neighboring big nation bullied me into backing down. This is quite a simple story, but it has a lot of juicy content here that we could use to expand out into an epic tale. How I choose to do it depends on my perspective, though. If I want to write an epic for the Asharian people, then my little character Dagonashabal is not gonna be the protagonist, but maybe an inciting incident to the larger war, where the benevolent sun god worshipping Asharias go crusade and justly kill the evil void worshipping Turtlonians. Funnily enough, that is exactly how the Asharians remember that war. Absolutely love how they intertwine history, mythology, and propaganda. That's basically what I'm asking you to do. But say I take it from the point of view of the northern continent of Pelagos. Then Dagonashabal will probably be the protagonist of this national origin story epic. The question then is, how do you want to frame the character of Dagonashabal? Because he was not a good person in this story. At best he's a trickster, and at worst he's a selfish thief and a bully. To decide, you need to look at the later history between when this story of Dagonashabal is set and right now. Say Plagos becomes a really big empire with a strong culture and a good player base later on. You might frame Dagonashabal as a kind of lovable trickster who does bad stuff and does a poor job setting up Plagos. But maybe there's a prophecy that Plagos will outlive him and his misdeeds, or maybe there are other good characters alongside him that plant the seed for a good and stable Plagos that we will eventually see in later history. If your story is indeed an epic, you're not just telling things about what happened. You're crafting and shaping the story so that it explains and sets up the history, character, and culture of your nation as it existed throughout history. Now, because of this, a big point I should make here is that you should not worry much about historical accuracy. Instead, your job is to use important historical events to build the best and most culturally significant story that you can. In real life, the story of the Trojan War is probably based on a real event, where a bunch of Greek city-states ganged up and they sacked the city of Troy during a time called the Bronze Age collapse. After this happened, people would have gone their separate ways, and all told stories about this war and the people involved, and the people would tell different versions of the story that appealed to their own sensibilities. So they'd be like, oh, well, your old king during the Trojan War was cool, but ours did this. Or maybe they'd be like, hey, the Trojans were actually the good guys. The Greeks coming here wasn't badass, it was a tragedy. Out of this event, you get this tradition in the region, where everyone is developing stories about the time these select characters sacked this particular city. And this development is happening over hundreds and hundreds of years, in tons of different contexts, where the audience's wants are applying different pressures and changes to how the story gets told. Eventually then, there comes this guy, or group of composers, called Homer, and a lot of the stories get stitched together into these really big, complex compositions, which were the best expression of this storytelling tradition. That gets written down in Athens, and bing bang bop, 2,500 years later, we are reading the Iliad and the Odyssey. If you're writing your very own epic, imagine like you're simulating this tradition of storytelling and story stitching for your own story. If you want to make a good national historical epic, you've got to lay out the basic details of the base story. Turn the players involved into characters with their own motivations and flaws. Mix and match details and plot threads with other stories, and then refine them into an emotionally satisfying drama that speaks volumes about your own nation and culture. If somebody reads your story and says, hey, that's not how it happened, good. How things happen in real life usually aren't great stories. Your job is to build an amazing story that will last throughout the ages. Now, this is a small side thing, but I want to harp on it because I've seen so many world builders get stuck in this trap of believability and realism. Throughout your story, you gotta have big moments. When the climax comes around, during the big final duel, when your nation gets founded, whatever. In many real epics, what really makes those moments work and stand out are some of the strange and unique details that emphasize the moment at hand. You need to commit to adding some weird details that are probably not going to be readily believable, because those details become iconic representations of the story. For example, a huge moment in the story of the Aztecs migrating to central Mexico is when they find the sign from their god Huitzilopochtli that this is the place to settle. And that sign is an eagle eating a snake while perched on a cactus. That's specific and weird, but it's so unique and iconic that it's the symbol of Mexico now. I know this might seem obvious, but just try to commit yourself to adding those unique details that make these big moments in your story worthy of being a painting. With that out of the way, let's talk about your story's format and its writing. Now, the way you can structure all this can be very diverse. If you're looking at real-life epics, how that works will depend on the story that you want to tell. The Epic of Israel, which is another name for the main narrative of the Hebrew Bible, is a generational drama, where generations of the same family and people struggle with following God and the worldly issues that are involved with that. The Passion of the Christ, where Jesus of Nazareth is sacrificed to form a new agreement with God and save mankind, is a cosmic drama, where these few characters on the ground fight this divinely important battle of good versus evil in its own religious context. The Iliad is a character drama, because while it's set during the Trojan War, the real story is about Achilles learning how to overcome his rage by showing mercy to his enemies. The Indian Mahābhārata is at its heart a political drama, because it's about a massive succession crisis where two branches of a family go to war with each other. Now, you can see all these sorts of dramas I'm laying out can be pretty big in scale. When it comes to the actual writing of your epic story, you have a certain advantage that most book authors don't have. Fantasy novels and fiction books are usually laid out as a series of scenes that are very descriptive with dialogue and immediate actions. These old epics, especially short ones like we're going to be writing, aren't laid out this way. They are more efficient in their words, and they leave out details that aren't important or full of symbolism. You often get more direct summaries of these events, and a less fleshed out, visualized scene. But for moments that are really important, or where people need to sit down and have a revealing conversation, then you slip into that scene writing with description and dialogue. Whatever you spend your time on in your story, where the pacing slows down, should be the important stuff that you want your readers to dwell upon. It's the difference between saying like, Gilgamesh gathered fire, and upon his fire he sacrificed a bull, versus a scene where it tells you the conversation and details of that moment. It might take hours to gather firewood and sacrifice a bull, but we don't need to see that. Leave out the unimportant stuff. Stay efficient with your writing. Related to this, oftentimes the composer of the epic story wants you to dwell on the culture's deeply coded value systems. These are very frequently embedded into epic stories, like if you've read the Bible or the Bhagavad Gita, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's a common tactic to take the most important story of your culture that has gods and admirable heroes that you want your people to emulate, and you have them explicitly preach at you, talking about what is good and what is bad. Moses receives the 10 Commandments from God in one of the most dramatic moments in the Epic of Israel. Jesus preaches and gives multiple sermons between the stories about his miraculous birth and death. Prince Arjuna talks to Vishnu for a long time about the purpose of life and destiny, and why you shouldn't be such a little bitch about killing your loved ones in battle. Or even if it's a little more subtle than that, if you've read the Odyssey, a book where a guy accidentally travels all around the Mediterranean Sea, couch-hopping among various kings and magic people, one of its key cultural points is that you need to be a good host to your guests, and especially not try to kill them. You can see how these epic stories clearly embed the values of their culture into them. If you're writing your own epic, try and think hard about the culture that you're representing here, and what you guys really and uniquely care about. Maybe it's as simple as, okay, my culture really values loyalty, so this guy will be the villain because he betrays the main character, and that's why he'll be tortured to death and drawn and quartered. That's not made up, by the way. That comes from a medieval French epic called The Song of Roland. Additionally, there are some literary techniques I want to go over that are staples of the epic style in many cultures. I'll dare to call them primitive, because in modern times these literary techniques happen more subtly. In epic stories, you get a lot of direct divine influence, where the gods make judgment calls and state lessons about what's good or bad. On top of that, you get a lot of prophecies, oaths, boasting, projections into the future that are taken super seriously, as they become plot elements that drive the story along and work as blatant foreshadowing with a later twist. As an example of that twist, the saga of Ragnar Lothbrok has Ragnar boast that he's going to conquer England with 2 ships, a stupid boast, but he has to go do it because he has honor and pride, so he goes over there and he gets killed. But he says something like, if the piglets could see what was happening to their father, they would squeal. And so he dies, and his sons hear about this, and they go and they invade England and they take over. So technically, Ragnar caused the conquest of England with 2 ships, but he didn't actually do it. That's the twist. Additionally, epic stories also inherit the same kind of dream logic that mythology does, where it's never really the most practical or obvious solution to something, and oftentimes it's because the gods and supernatural forces just work in weird ways. Like in the Epic of Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh is asking about how to be immortal, and his teacher's not like, okay, here's your new diet regimen and exercise plan and the supplements to boost your immune system. He says, okay, first, don't sleep for a week. It doesn't make any real sense, but it's a good story that works in the weird logic when you accept the supernatural. If you commit to these choices in your format and style, it will go very far to making an impactful and iconic, recognizable epic for your culture. And lastly, let's talk about the most important thing: your story. This is a lesson that I think a lot of people learn as they become experienced storytellers, so I hope it's useful to a lot of you and it helps you cut past the trial and error phase. You can have a story that's about something, but that story needs to be truly thematically about something deeper. So I previously noted the Iliad is about the Trojan War, but when you read it, it starts 9 years into the war, and you don't get to see the coolest iconic moments, like Helen getting kidnapped, Achilles dying from an arrow to the heel, or the Greeks infiltrating the city via big hecking wooden horse. All this stuff is missing. So is it really about the Trojan War? No. The war is an exciting set piece that allows for a lot of action and big questions. The story is thematically about the personal development of Achilles and him learning to let go of his rage by forgiving his enemies. Here's a brief plot summary. One of the Greek kings pisses off Achilles so much that he refuses to fight. Achilles' lover friend puts on his armor and gets killed by the Trojan prince. Achilles gets mad and kills the Trojan prince in a duel, but he can't find any peace after doing all the normal stuff like taking revenge, funerals, partying, all that. But finally, the Trojan king bravely sneaks into Achilles' tent and asks for his son's body back so that they can hold their funeral. And only by agreeing to this act of compassion and treating the Trojan king with respect does Achilles find peace. It's a beautiful story, truthfully. There's just a lot of thick war and old flowery language to get through to understand it. The story is set during the war. The war is a necessary context and backdrop for everything that happens in it. It allows us some awesome and exciting scenes full of battles and duels. It's necessary, but the heart of the story isn't battle. It's the deep, personal growth of this person. That's why the poem starts by directly stating, "Rage, sing muses of the rage of Achilles." Now, I will criticize about the Iliad from my own modern point of view that it would have been better to add better summaries of the iconic moments that we all know and love into a prologue and epilogue. But that's more me telling you to do that instead of me being intellectually honest to the source material. So let's take a look at an example of what it's like to write this all out. A few months ago, I made a video about a conflict on Rathnir called the Kartek Wars, some brutal and really complex civil wars. And I went into writing this video simply trying to understand the wars and make a chronology that explains them simply. But while interviewing some of its players, one of them made an offhand remark that really told me what the heart of this story was. He said, "Yeah, we really became the bad guys here, LOL. Only then did I realize that the story wasn't the wars. It was about a group of friends that were driven into hating each other and becoming genocidal bad people through the harshness of the wars." I explored this in the writing by setting up the group of friends who avoid war as happy in the beginning, but then they get driven to war and they do worse and worse acts of violence, and the named characters start betraying each other for their own reasons, and they get more and more entrenched and proud of their cold and violent attitude, until they straight up genocide the group of their most peaceful friend that doesn't want anything to do with war. If you've seen that video, I'll tell you, if I were a better storyteller, I would have had a moment where one of the main characters who's gone bad realizes, and he breaks down and goes, "Oh my god, what have I become?" But the story works as is to show you how to write these underlying themes. The events I'm writing about are these Kartek Wars. The human theme I'm exploring is betrayal and becoming evil. If you want to do that kind of good writing, you can't just state the things that happened. You have to twist and mold them, emphasize certain characters and events, make them a little bit unrealistic, and really play up the drama of the important moments in your story that are telling about who these people are. So, lo and behold, this is everything I know about writing epic stories, boiled down to around 20 minutes. If you want to ask more questions or advice, please leave a Patreon or a YouTube comment below this video, and I can talk to you one-on-one about it. Additionally, I've left a link in the comments to a list of some great epic stories and some YouTube videos summarizing and analyzing them. Just watch some of these for inspiration when writing your own national epic. Thank you for watching, and of course, thank you all so much for your support.